Making a strong first impression is crucial in your professional life, whether it be written, verbal, or visual, what we call the triple threat of first impressions. So remember, email counts. Today I'm joined by Lynn Lawson, an expert in making lasting impressions, to share essential tips for excelling in all three areas. Stick around until the end for exclusive advice on making a good impression on a job interview. Now let's get started.
I believe it might have even been part of our webinar description that here's what experts say goes into first impressions. And I don't need to read the slide to you, but they can make up their mind about you in as little as 7 seconds. And that was according to an article that we saw about 4 years ago, but it probably hasn't changed all that much. So what we're really saying here is about 93% of someone's opinion has nothing to do with what you say. It's what you look like, it's the tone, and just some other factors. So it is so important to keep all of this in mind when we are meeting people for the first time. First impressions, situations. I mean, I think all of us realize, yes, in interviews, that's a big one, or starting a new job. But it's not just about you being the new person. Sometimes you get a new manager, a new executive that's coming into your organization, and, they're going to get a first impression of you right off the bat. And if that is a poor one, that's going to make your job probably a little more uncomfortable if you have a new management person who's not so thrilled with you. Or what about even if you are just on a new work project with other members of a different team within your organization? It could be you're going to a business conference and you're establishing a reputation for yourself, especially if you're in a speaking role at a conference. And then it's even things like externally, you might be working with a vendor. You might be responding to an external auditor. So there's all these different situations where you're meeting people for the first time. And I think, with the world reopening, so to speak, as it has been so often these last several months, you might even find yourself at a work social event among people you've never met. And that could include some management people. So lots of different situations. It's not strictly interviews or starting a new job, but we do have examples, many of which pertain to job interviews. And now what we're sharing is extreme, but this is true. And I know, Mary, you have a couple, but I'll share some of mine. And it's more for laughs, but it's also, we could say we could cry over them. But I had someone, this is all true. In one of my past jobs, we were looking for a new team member, and my manager had an interview scheduled with someone. The job candidate called that morning of her interview and said she wanted to reschedule because it was raining outside and she didn't want to go out in the rain. And my manager basically said, well, no, thanks. We can just cancel the interview and let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the first impression is this woman isn't going to show up in inclement weather, so we don't need to interview her. I had a friend who is in an upper management position who just this year was interviewing someone through Zoom, and the job candidate kept drinking from a political mug or tumbler or something throughout the whole interview. It was clearly in view, and they would take sips from this mug, and it had a real strong political message on it. And it didn't even align with the organization's values, so that made it worse. I have encountered a new employee who plagiarized something when tasked with a writing assignment. That's just a whole different example you might not have thought about. And then I had a family member recently was interviewing someone, and he said that the guy, first of all, showed up late. Then in the middle of the interview, his phone rang, and that can be an innocent mistake if you forget to silence your phone. But the guy turned to my friend who was the interviewer, or my family member, and said, just a second, I got to get this. And it didn't appear to be any sort of, family emergency. So he took a phone call in the middle of the interview, and at one point looked at my family member who was interviewing, doing the interviewing. And he said, wouldn't it be easier to take notes on a computer versus on a piece of paper and pen, using pen and paper instead? So criticizing the interview technique. Mary, do you want to add into that?
I was on the phone. I was doing a Zoom, something or other, with Tom Flynn, who some of you will know, and I'm pretty sure you know him, Lynn. Anyway, and we're talking, we're getting ready to tape, and all of a sudden he said to me, "Oh, you're a Harry Potter fan." And I was like, "Yes, but how did you know that?" And he said, "Oh, I see the sign." And way in the back of my office is a sign that says Hogwarts Express 9 3/4, which was, the Harry Potter train. So you don't know what's around you, and you need to take a close look around and make sure it sends the message that you want. Now, in that case, I didn't care. It's no big deal, but you never know.
Yeah, good reminders. I mean, all these little things that can come up, and some of which seem perfectly innocent, but you just never know. And we're talking both in person and virtual. I like cartoons, or Mary, I know you like
I love
cartoons,
them.
so I had to throw this in there. I don't remember why I called this meeting. Well, to me that goes along with first impressions too. You might get a new boss, they do this, and you're all sitting there, and they're like, Let's get into the preparation aspect. What 3 things can you do in advance of a meeting to really prepare? And so, I divided it between, if you're leading a meeting, there's things on the left there. If you're simply attending, things on the right. But, it comes down to, you really need to know in advance, who will you be among in this meeting? Who are you speaking to? Who are you attending with? Knowing what those people represent, what are their pain points? What departments do they work in? You just, and even their job titles. Also, you need to understand the topic. So obviously, if you're the leader, you want to summarize a topic, because not everyone will be up to speed on what you are about to address. So it's good to provide that summary, just a quick, little snapshot to get everyone on the same page. But if you're attending, don't walk into a meeting and say, well, I don't know anything about this. I mean, do your research in advance. That will make you look obviously more well-informed, and you can have a more productive meeting. And then third thing, if you're the leader, you really want to understand, if you're especially proposing something or looking at a change, what is that going to do to the rest of the organization? And, this is another example where a friend of mine said, he goes into these meetings and a leader is so zeroed in on their little corner of the world, and they have this big proposal and they want to change something, and it would actually totally undo currently efficient running operations. And so he gets so frustrated that they don't have any clue as to how it would impact everyone else. And then on the flip side, if you're an attendee, you do want to be prepared to either provide information that will help the topic at hand, or you have prepare questions in advance. So Mary, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, a lot of times, or sometimes, it just depends upon the organization structure. You'll be invited to these really big meetings, and maybe for all managers. I used to work for a company where there might be 25 or 30 of us in a conference room, or anyway. So you go to the meeting, ahead of time what they're going to talk about. If you give it a little thought beforehand, because they'll say, "Are there any questions?" And everybody's looking at each other. Nobody can think of anything to ask at that point, me included, by the way. But if you can think about it a little bit ahead of time and come up with some really insightful question related to the issue, and you can ask it, that will do a lot towards making people realize that you're somebody to be reckoned with, and a potential leader.
I agree with that. But then as you were talking, Mary, it just occurred to me that I tend to be probably extreme in that regard. I might start peppering someone with questions. There's my mistake. I'm like, what about?
Right.
And that can be annoying. So
right. If you want to do that, just do that, I would say, afterwards separately, not in a public setting.
Right. No, I agree. I'm willing to fess up to some of my, lesser desirable qualities.
Tell me about it.
Okay. Well, so that's the preparation aspect. And I think this, for me at least, is something I don't always think about. You're running from one meeting to the next, and, you suddenly realize you don't know what an upcoming meeting is for, and it doesn't help you, and especially in these first impression situations. So speaking of, let's get into the whole aspect of virtual meetings. Now that you've all, or most of you, have admitted to your company doesn't give any guidance here. So you have the dreaded animals. Well, one, we know things can happen, and you can't always avoid a barking dog, loud children, or whatever, especially, if you're working from home is what we're sort of zeroed in on. And you might even have a boss who encourages employees to show their pets on camera. That's truly different than making a good first impression. Again, we're focused on these first impression situations. And if you're meeting someone for the first time and they just want to have their cat walk across the screen, you just don't know how anyone's going to feel about that. So, we are
Especially
suggesting.
as dog people.
What's that, Mary?
Especially as dog people.
Well, yes, I am a dog person, but I can appreciate cats. That's all right. And then, you get into things like that unprofessional background. I know Mary and I have come across people that might be taking a virtual meeting in a bedroom, for example. And for me, that's like too personal. I would, at least blur the background or something, that would be my preference. Noise, that's an obvious thing. You don't want to be sitting in a Starbucks if you can help it. And you don't want to look like you just rolled out of bed. That's just what happens. That's the biggest thing that I think I've been hearing from other managers is the last 2 years, people show up looking so scruffy, so unprofessional, and it's just a real turnoff. And, I would add to this, avoid not using the mute button, or let's turn that around. Do use the mute feature effectively. And, then we've all been in meetings too, where you're muted and they ask you a question and you start talking and you forget to unmute. And again, these are innocent mistakes, but it just, it kind of makes someone look like they're not paying attention, I think. I don't know. So, Mary,
can I share about that? So I don't think any of you folks know. One of the people that I deal with, Jamie Radford, who you do know, has an admin, Anna. And every time she's on screen with us, she always, especially like when we knew that we were all at home, she always has this great looking background on her screen. And after I got to know her rather well, she shared with me what she does. She says, that's a screen. She said, right behind that screen is my unmade bed. And you can go on Amazon if you're in that situation where you're stuck, where you don't have a lot of space and you have to take the meeting in your bedroom. It happens to all of us. But then just get the screen like she did, so it looks much more professional, or blur the background.
Yeah, that's a great idea. One time I even had a door behind me, and you couldn't. It just looked like a nice wood wall or wood panel because I just turned it in a certain way. So I know it's just these little things. Are you setting your environment up to make yourself look as good as possible? And we know too, if you really want to get into it, and we won't here today, but there's special lighting you can get and everything else to really make everybody look stunning. But let's just focus on like the mistakes people make and some things you can do better.
That you can change easily.
Exactly, without hiring a makeup artist every time. So yeah. Okay, so what does that lead to? So best practices in terms of meetings. We talked about the preparation aspect. You do want to look professional. We mentioned that. But, eliminate the distractions. That's silencing the devices. It's, taking a good look around in your work from home environment. Don't multitask. I know I have a friend who told me she's guilty of this, that when she's working from home, she's sometimes working on email and all of a sudden they call on her in a meeting and she's like, oh, I got to regroup. Timeliness is another factor. Arrive and end on time. And I know this seems logical, but I've been in meetings with people and I know them, but still they walk into a Zoom meeting and everyone's sort of settling in and chit-chatting and I'm looking at the clock and, the real business doesn't get started like until 10 minutes past the hour. And so even if it's typical for other employees to arrive late, I would say just don't do it. You can set a better standard. Also, if you're someone who is scheduling the meeting, don't schedule a 30-minute meeting for a topic that likely requires an hour or more or multiple meetings. In fact, it's good to respect everyone's time, end on time. Don't make people run from one meeting to the next. Give them a couple minutes if you can towards the end. And then that whole notion of staying on topic. Again, I've been on committees or in meetings where someone is delightful, but something comes up and then all of a sudden she interjects with a story and sometimes it relates and sometimes it doesn't. Even when it relates, it's not helpful helping the matter that we're discussing. It's related, but it's like, okay, no, we're here to solve a problem, and that's just a nice story. And then also focus, you want to be ready to contribute. So that's that actively listen. One of the best pieces of advice I was given is really sit back, especially when you're new, and listen to everyone's opinion without trying to formulate your next statement or your next, lobbying effort. You might have something in mind that you want to do, but you need to hear what everyone else is saying, because that might change your mind on what you're about to propose. So listening is so important, especially when you're new. Mary, do you want to add to this one?
The listening is really important, and it's one of the hardest things to do, because I'll be listening to you, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm already formulating what I'm going to say in response. Then sometimes you miss something important. I will tell you that a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go home then at night and I'll think back about the different conversations that I've had, and sometimes something will occur to me then. And in fact, some of my best deals have come, or my best recommendations, let's put it that way, from going home and thinking and then saying, so-and-so has this problem and such could fix it, and then going back the next day and following up.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, one piece of advice before we move off this slide is, I think especially for the young people, we're going to move into, the obvious. I've seen it on Zoom calls and even, in person, but I've done more remote than in person in the last couple of years. That whole, making eye contact, looking interested, if you can, look up and you want to interact and connect with people and use that positive body language. So I don't know, Mary, if you have examples that.
Yeah. So
against the obvious?
The first time I saw somebody had taped me and I looked at it, afterwards, I never smiled. And I was having a good time, but I almost looked angry, and I was like, oh my God, you've got to smile more.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I think, you get so focused on what you're saying and what you're doing, you forget to smile. And then people think you're angry.
What a difference a smile makes. And we all know this. That's why I'm labeling it the obvious. But hey, we all need reminders. Again, this could be internal, obviously within your own jobs, within your own companies, or it could be something you're doing at a business conference, or, maybe you're pitching something to another organization, who knows? But I love this quote. And so I had to put it in here, about your slides should be a billboard, not a document. And Mary, I kid you not, I was working on this presentation for you, and I was also planning an event with someone else, and they sent me their slides, and it breaks every single rule or pitfall, it breaks the rules. It has all the pitfalls that I'm going to discuss here. I see it so often. I mean, think real simply. You want to display enough information for your audience to understand your key messages. But if you need to convey anything beyond that, put it in a handout for people. And one of the biggest things, would be research or study results. We've all seen it, those tiny little charts, and no one can read them. And, people say, well, I know you can't read this. Well, then don't put it in there.
Right. Well, I always tell people, my rule of thumb is if you're trying to make the font smaller to make it fit on the page, make it two slides, or take some of the information out.
Yeah, exactly. No, don't make fonts. Pitfalls to avoid. All right. So we're already, giving you the sneak peek, but it's that excessive text. And including people, I've seen this over and over, they'll put in complete sentences on their slide that matches their planned verbal delivery. And, then it's just they're reading to people. Maybe some people like that. I don't know. And I know, Mary, you and I have talked about some topics, like what would be 1099 reporting.
The tax ones.
Yes.
The guy that we use, he puts a lot of information, but people download it. Now, if you and I were doing that, we put that in a separate document and give it to people.
You want it to be easy to read. So you do want to avoid that whole small font or all these, tiny charts and things like that. Mary and I have talked about this a lot over the years too. The whole thing about clip art, cartoons, images, things like that. And the biggest thing I see over and over, Dilbert cartoons. We all love Dilbert and we know how real they are to represent the workforce, but there are copyright violations.
On Dilbert, yes.
Yeah, well, on anything like that, I
Yes.
just pulled out
Yeah.
Dilbert because everyone likes to throw those cartoons in there. And there was a time when I was researching, because I really wanted to use a Dilbert cartoon for something, I went on the right path to find out what do I need to do to get permission to use this. I think like the fee, there's a fee involved.
There's a
I think
fee.
it was excessive. It was an excessive fee to use a cartoon. So
Right.
anyway.
If you want to use images, same thing with music. If you're putting something together, what you want to do is go to one of the royalty, and you don't want to pay for it. You want to go to one of the sites that offers these for free use, but you need to be really, really careful.
Other pitfalls, I mean, just, disjointed, the fonts and the colors. And we know, especially being in the accounting realm, accounts payable, those undefined acronyms. I'm sure Mary will remember, we were in a presentation together once, and it was not to an accounts payable audience, but it was a related audience. And someone, do you remember, asked, what does AP stand for?
Yes.
We
So that
were a
comes
little
to
taken
knowing,
aback.
that comes back to knowing your audience.
So there you go. You and I made a mistake of not
Right.
defining that is, someone doing a presentation, and can't you see it now? When she's saying, oh, here's where you give me your non-comprehending nods of approval. People who do a presentation that's so complex, and I'm thinking to the people that love their charts and graphs, that
Yeah.
everyone just nods like, yeah, I know exactly what they're saying, when you know
Having
that
a
no
clue.
one's. Again, we're focused on these first impressions. We know that if you're in a setting with people you've worked with for years, all of these things we're saying might be perfectly acceptable, but not when you're doing things for the first time.
Right.
Today, at one point or another, most professionals will be called upon to put together a slide deck. In the less than 5 minutes we've allocated to talk about PowerPoint, we won't make you an expert, but we will give you some basics that will ensure you don't look like a PowerPoint novice when making those all-important presentations to management.
What are the magic numbers you need to know to put together an eye-pleasing PowerPoint slide? Now, if you're a programmer or a mathematician or someone interested in game theory, you probably have your own definition of what a magic number is, and they're accurate, okay? But today we're going to talk about a different type of magic number. We're talking about PowerPoint magic numbers, and they have their own definitions. Now, when we talk about PowerPoint, the first and second magic numbers are the same. They're the number 6. What does this mean? Well, the first number 6 means that on a slide, so that it doesn't look too crowded and your audience can see, you'll have no more than 6 lines. The second magic number 6 says that each of these 6 lines should have no more than 6 words. So 6 lines with 6 words, your slide won't be too messed up. People will be able to see in the audience, and you might even be able to add a picture or something. You can have less, by the way. If you look back at some of Steve Jobs' talks, he sometimes had a slide with 1 word, but I'm not suggesting that. So 6 lines, 6 words. The last magic number is 24. And this refers to your font size. So you should always have font size that is at least 24 fonts. It can be higher. It can be 30, 36, whatever you decide. But the smallest font on the page, if you want the audience to be able to see it, should be 24. And as I said, it can be higher. So we sometimes refer to this magic rule, if you will, as the rule of 6-6-4. Okay, no more than 6 words per line, no more than 6 lines, and font size at least 24.
Some more presentation tips. Really pay attention to what is your message and ensure that everything in your presentation supports what your message is. And again, back to knowing your audience, you do want to find out what are the content expectations. So if it's something like a webinar that you're doing or at a conference when you're presenting, make sure that anything that was in the description you are addressing within your presentation. Mary and I mentioned handouts already that can support a message. It can be a good idea to ask somebody else to review it, to look for some of these pitfalls, undefined acronyms, or maybe improperly using a cartoon or something. And we've, well, at least I've been there where you do a presentation and nobody has questions at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it is good to have some things prepared that you can throw out out to the audience if you're in person or virtually or however you're doing it. But then also practice. And we can all probably relate to this as well, that either people speed up or slow down during the actual presentation, even if they've practiced it and it's boom, it's 45 minutes. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. All of a sudden they go in person and it goes over an hour or maybe 20 minutes. So do be mindful of that and try to maybe even take notes on the slides where, by slide 20, you should be at X point of the presentation. And by slide 25, you should be at X point or time. Yep. I find that helpful anyway.
So can I throw in something here? And this goes not only for presentations, but Word documents, emails, everything that you write. Keep spell check and grammar check on so that it will underline it in red. Now, I'm going to admit, and some of you've probably seen, sometimes even underlining it in red, and I'm running through it, I miss that there's a misspelling. Sometimes it won't be a misspelling. It'll just be a jargon word that you use within your organization. So keep it on. With Grammatech, you've got to take what it says with a grain of salt. It'll underline it in blue and look, because it's not perfect. So sometimes it's wrong, but at least give it a look.
Those are settings that can accidentally get turned off. I believe they're usually defaulted to being on, but
some people will turn them off.
Right, and then forget to turn them back on, and that can be a bad thing. Yeah.
And it can be really annoying if you're using a word, maybe a company name, whatever it is, that's a legitimate word, but your dictionary doesn't recognize it. And if that happens, what you can do is add it to the dictionary so you don't have a page full of those annoying red underlines.
That's great. And in fact, all of these tips, Mary, I think that really brings us into our next topic here too, of business writing, because these are things to be mindful of for sure. Let's start with business emails. Let me just go through some, and then I actually have an example here. You want to avoid things like the dreaded hello, exclamation point. What are you doing there? Exclamation, the exclamation. Yeah. Or people that put things in all capital letters way too often in order to stress a point. Or people that apply that high importance tag, an email that makes it have the they think everything they're sending you is important, and I would say most people don't want you to do that. You want to avoid those long, rambling emails, long, thick, heavy, text-heavy paragraphs. We've already spoken about the obvious, the errors in spelling and grammar, punctuation. I think, even, using the shorthand texting speak, throughout, that
not in a business email.
Well, right. Because I know I've had to look at something and I realized, oh, that's a texting acronym. Dude, it's that audience factor again. You might, when I say audience, I mean, you might exclude the right person for a topic, or you might be including more people than what is necessary for a particular topic. So do think about the audience.
Yeah. So the one thing that I want to bring up about email is you could be writing to your boss and you have a really good relationship with your boss, and maybe you even use some of the texting shorthands because it's just email, right? And you're going back and forth and you're discussing something and whatever. Remember, email can be forwarded. So, your boss at some point might think, oh, that's really a great idea. I'm going to forward this to the CFO so Jane gets credit. Well, the CFO then can read all the emails below it, and you're talking, are you, and whatever other shorthand you use. So just remember, before you put anything in email, think of it as a postcard. Anyone could end up seeing it. And of course, it goes without saying, never write an email when you're angry.
So obviously, when it comes to best practices, we want to cease the poor practices, right? You do want to think about, that's the audience, targeting the right people. You want to keep things short, simple, especially when you're emailing management people that get even more email than you do. I think that it's so difficult this day and age with so many organizations being shorthanded and not having enough people. If you send someone a big paragraph, it doesn't work well. One manager said, I want to know in the very first line what they're asking for. So that's put that ask up front. Put in the very first line, I'm requesting blah, 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 and then you can provide the background. And, this person also had said, said, if emails are going back and forth like more than 3 times, you got to stop. You got to schedule a meeting, a call, something to hash it out, not over email, but, more direct, verbal, in person or virtual. And then, Mary, like you're saying about not sending things when angry, do pause, review what you're looking at first. I think I was looking up, there was a source, I was trying to figure out, the quantity of emails people get. And one source thought that office workers receive more than 120 emails per day on average.
I could agree with that.
And we know there's so many people that love the reply all, and that just makes the problem even worse. And I think we just have to be so mindful about that. I don't know if you want to add more to it.
I do want to add one thing, and this is especially important when you're sending an email or a report to your boss. You need to know the audience, read the room, however you want to put it. You need to know what kind of communication that person likes, especially if it's your boss or your boss's boss. Do they want, a short paragraph with 3 bullet points? Or there are a few people out there, God knows I'm not one of them, who like those long paragraphs that go on with every last detail that nobody really needs to know. So know who you're writing to.
Of course, email has its own set of rules. Let's go over a few of the basics. Business email can be your friend or your enemy. Used properly, it can improve your productivity and your career prospect. But alas, one small misstep and you can throw all that progress down the drain. Let's take a look at 13 of these often overlooked missteps so you don't fall into any of these traps. So mistake number 1, don't forget, or if you forget, that an email is like a postcard. You never know who is going to see it. It can be forwarded, copied, and of course there's always that dreaded reply all. So think twice before you put something in writing that might come back to haunt you later. Mistake number 2, and this is when you're involved in an email chain with someone, you're having a conversation, and you forget to change the subject line when the subject gets changed. So you might start off discussing, let's say with your boss, a particular invoice problem, and then you start talking about vacation time, but you don't change the subject line. And then a few days later, a week later, a month later, when you're going back looking for that email that discussed the vacation time, you can't find it because it's under that email that says, invoice from ABC company. Mistake number 3 is not looking closely at the language that you use in the email. Sometimes we're too curt. I'm sure you've received emails from someone and you've thought, is he mad at me or is she mad at me or did I offend her? When actually nothing could be further from the truth. But you dash off the email quickly and you don't stop and go back and look and see how it sounds. So just a quick read before you hit that send button will sometimes make you realize, this sounds a little too curt. Okay, mistake number 4, I'm sure you've heard this one, not that you necessarily listen to it because it's really tempting, and that is responding when you're angry. Never respond to an email when you're angry. Mistake number 5, be very careful if you're going to use emojis. Now, most advice when it comes to business emails and emojis will tell you never use them. And I want to say that that's probably a good piece of advice, but I'm going to be honest, I occasionally use them. I'm especially fond of that thumbs up, which saves me, writing a whole sentence when, I can just say it with an emoji. So if you're going to use them, know who you're talking to and make sure that it comes across professionally. And remember that issue that we talked about when we first started. You never know who that email is going to be forwarded to. So best piece of advice probably is don't use emojis, but I have to admit sometimes I do. Okay, the next mistake or misstep, if you will, and it's the same in other means of correspondence, is the timeliness of your response. You want to respond in a timely manner. Don't leave the email, you think, I'm busy now, I'll respond tomorrow, or I'll respond tonight, because the odds are you'll forget, and then it'll be 2 weeks later, and then before you know it, you're running looking for the email, you can't find it, or you just completely forget about it. So as much as possible, when you get that email, if you know the answer, respond immediately. Mistake number 7 that we see people making is avoid those annoying reply alls with meaningless information. Too often an email will go out from, let's say, the boss to, 12 subordinates subordinates about some particular issue, and one person responds and they have something intelligent or interesting to say or something that adds value to the conversation, and then before you know it, 6 of the other people feel they have to say something and they respond, but they don't add anything to the conversation, and everybody's email box is then inundated with these useless responses. The next mistake regards sending attachments. Now, I'm not saying don't send attachments, which in an ideal world, that's what you do, but we have to work, we have to get our jobs done. So when you're sending attachments, a few things. Number one, make sure the person that you're sending the attachment to is expecting it. So they're expecting you to send a file. Don't just send it out of the blue, because with all the frauds that we have going on, and some of those frauds are perpetrated by opening an attachment that you don't know who it's from. So make sure your recipient knows that you're going to send it to them, and you might even send them an email first or a text first saying, sending you an email with the file about whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's number one. And number two, be careful when you name your files. Make sure they're easily identifiable, not only to you, but to the person who's receiving them. So I know, for example, when I write books, I usually have a chapter in each book. And when I'm, working on the manuscript, I title each of the chapters C1, C2, C3, C4. Well, that works fine for me when I go back and I look at it, because I have a folder with the book name and then all my chapters in there. So I know what they are. But if I were to send it to somebody, they get this file that says C2. What is it? So, it really should be the book name, chapter 2, etc. So just something that whoever sees it, they'll be able to know what is in that file. This might mean, by the way, that you have to rename some of your files if you're going to share them with other people. Number 9, don't forget to include a signature. Sometimes, you send an email and of course the person knows who's sending it because they can see your name in the from field. But as the responses go back and forth, if there's no signature on them, or there's several people in this conversation, if you will, in this email conversation, after a while, it's difficult to tell who sent what and who said what. And you want credit, by the way, for your good ideas. You don't want it being given to somebody else. So each of your emails should have a signature in it of some sort. Now, speaking of signatures, don't forget to put your signature block in, but to have your name, the name of your company, and your phone number in that block, and maybe your email address, although in theory they can get it if you're sending them an email. But I can't tell you the number of times when I go to call somebody in response to an email, and in fact, they may even have said, call me, and I can't find their phone number because it's not in their emails. And yeah, if I have in my address book, I might have it there, but a lot of times I don't. So always put your name, company name, and your phone number so people can get in touch with you. Number 11, be very careful about using humor and sarcasm, because what you say in person, when somebody can see you, they can hear the tone of your voice, they can see the look on your face, that does not come across in email. And sometimes it really falls flat. And in fact, going back to the issue we discussed in the beginning about being curt, it may just come across as curt, or that you're angry, or just plain rude. So yeah, it's nice to be able to use humor every once in a while, but be very careful when you do. Make sure that the recipient will understand it. Okay, coming down towards the end, mistake number 12, don't forget to proof your emails. Real quickly, just do a quick read. And the reason for that is you're looking for typos and you're looking for tone, like we've discussed before, because you don't want to come across curt, but you really want to look for those typos. You don't have to spend a long time doing it. Just do it really quickly. If you've kept spell check on, which is something we advocate, then the typos should have an underlined in red. But sometimes the typos won't show that way because, for example, you'll have meant there, T-H-E-I-R, but you'll have spelled it T-H-E-R-E because you're in such a hurry. So you want to look for stuff like that, because remember, even though you might be writing to a colleague who doesn't really care about that type of thing, the email could get forwarded, copied, reply all, etc. Okay, so just take a quick read. And then the last tip is sometimes when people write, they just write all in lowercase, okay? They don't bother to capitalize the first letter or the first word in each sentence. Okay, minor point, and again, if you're going back and forth with a colleague or even your boss who you have a good relationship with, no big deal. Along the same lines, be very careful about putting something in all caps, because all caps is the equivalent to yelling. It looks unprofessional. Now, this is not to say that from time to time, if you're trying to emphasize something, that you might not use a word in all cap. but use that sparingly just when you're trying to make a point. And whatever you do, don't send something in all caps. It kind of screams out, I'm an amateur, I don't know what I'm doing.
Frequently missing piece is what problem is it solving? People sometimes will, we need to change this, and it doesn't really get into the bigger, it doesn't provide enough clarity to identify the problem. You have to do that first and then clearly provide the business justification for a recommendation. And again, this goes back to earlier when we were saying you need to understand when you're proposing something, what impact is that going to have on other departments that you may not be aware of? If you cut off, X technology, well, then is this department over here left without the things that they need to do their job? So think about the whole what, why, how, when, who, those key things that really get at what is the problem. And then, you have to, I think, in these proposals, get into the why, the costs versus the benefits as well. And, how long will it take to achieve the benefits? Mm-hmm. Today here might not be doing a lot of proposals, but you could apply this even into an email as well if you're suggesting a change.
Well, a lot of our people then are going to be doing proposals or have done proposals in the last few years as more and more companies adopt automation solutions. When they go to management, not only the why, the big thing is how much is it going to cost us.
But, you can't just say, oh, it's going to cost, and I'm making this up, don't quote me, $50,000 this year. Well, that is true, but then the offset is we're going to save X dollars on this. And so, what's the return on the investment? Will it take a year or will it 2 years? So yeah, you have to put both pieces in, because just saying the cost of a solution isn't quite enough. But let's see when we can get our money back, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So final advice when it comes to writing. I mean, we're going back to the same old. Well, not even writing. I think this is just in general. You do want to always know your audience, and facts are good. That's facts that can be supported by data. Mm-hmm. Truly are the best. Avoid opinions, avoid criticizing other people or processes that someone within your audience might have been had a role in implementing. Try to avoid emotional arguments, because that happens a lot. Or avoid coming on too strong. Volunteer to help. If you put yourself out there being willing to help, that makes you look good. I'll say this as an introvert, it's sometimes hard to take advantage of opportunities to meet people, but I think that can go a long way, when you can just meet people and get to know them and network, because, be mindful that the first impressions you make really can impact you, your career, years or even decades later. Mm-hmm. And more recently, I just did something for a new customer. And as it turns out, one of the people that worked for this new customer, I had met 20 years ago. And so I thought, wow, if I made a bad impression on him 20 years ago, is he going to be less likely to listen to my message today?
So can I tell you, take advantage of opportunities to meet new people? I just came back from a conference in the UK. It was for AP people, and in 2 instances there, the people, the attendees had met their current boss at a conference. And by the way, meeting people is not only in person, of course, that's the obvious, but I've met a number of people who I have actually very good relationships with. Professional relationships is what I'm talking about, and I've met them online, either on LinkedIn, the obvious place, but also amazingly a few of them on Twitter.
And maybe that actually, Mary, I think raises the point of your social media presence. Mm-hmm. It might be great, say on LinkedIn, but what if your Facebook makes you look like an entirely different person?
Yeah,
and I don't mean for the better.
Yeah, be careful.
It all kind of flows together at times, or it has that potential anyway. So,
yeah.
Okay.
We could probably spend several hours discussing the written word, but I don't want to put you to sleep, so just a few pointers.
Business writing, the topic that is usually ignored by professionals until they make a really, really bad mistake. Today, we are going to discuss 10 that can hurt your careers or just make you look really bad. We're going to talk about these little mistakes that people make that can make you really, really look bad. Of course, whenever you do any business writing, you want to incorporate incorporate the 7 C's of effective business communication: clarity, correctness, conciseness, courtesy, concreteness, consideration, and completeness. But we're not going to talk about that now. So number 1, and you know this, but it catches people time and time again. Don't forget to focus on the difference between reply and reply all. I'm sure we've all got stories. I want to say funny stories, but often they're not really funny stories. They can do some real harm when you hit that reply all instead of reply. Okay, that's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, don't forget the basics. Things like capitalizing all sentences, using proper English, using proper punctuation, and of course, correct spelling. In many instances, that email that you send out will be the first contact or communication you have with an executive, somebody you want to do business with, and you know what they say about first impression. Really hard to overcome that. Next mistake, and I see this as a mistake, you may not see it as, but I really do. Don't turn off spell check. The beauty of spell check is it puts those little red lines underneath the word telling you, hey, go back and check the spelling. Now, you may think you turn it off and you think, okay, it looks fine. You go ahead and send it out. Unfortunately, your boss probably does have spell check on, and when it shows up in his email box or her email box, that red line will be just there waving, say, hey, look who made a mistake. And even if it's not, even if they don't have it turned on, somehow your eyes always go to the spelling errors that other people make. Not the ones that you make, but the ones that other people make. Okay, once you've finished writing something, be it a memo, an email, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Don't forget to go back and check for run-on sentences. I know this is one of my big flaws. Go back and look. The sentence goes on for 3, 4, 5 lines. You want to take a look and say, hey, can I maybe take out an and make it 2 sentences? And will it be a little bit clearer then? It usually is. Next mistake, don't forget to make sure your paragraphs are in easy, digestible chunks. So if you have a long paragraph, and you can see that visually, that goes on and on, just go back and break it sometimes into even 3 or 4 paragraphs. You want to make sure that, people's eyes don't glaze over when they see it, or they lose their spot in the middle of your paragraph and then whatever. So just make sure short sentences, short paragraph. Next mistake, don't forget to check to make sure that every thought that you have, every sentence that you have includes a verb. Sometimes when you're writing fast, the thoughts are going through your head quickly. You're writing, and you don't really have complete sentences. And one way to check that is, do you have a capitalization at the beginning? Is there a verb? And do you have a period? Okay. So don't forget to check for those verbs. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that one. And it seems like, oh, nobody would do that, but people do. Don't forget to check for clarity. When you go back and you read, this is especially important if there's more than one person in the discussion. And if there is, and you refer to he or she, is it really crystal clear who you're referring to? If there can be any sort of a misinterpretation, go back and put the person's name in, Tom or John or Mary or Jane, so that it can be really, really clear. If you're trying to make a number of points, don't forget to use bullet points. It can just make things a lot clearer. It's like having short sentences and shorter paragraphs. Those bullet points really bring it home. So if you want to say, hey, we have 3 alternatives, 1, 2, and 3, bullet point them. It'll stand out. And after you bullet point them and you go back and you look at your email, you might want to consider going in and putting a space between each bullet point if you haven't done that, if it hasn't automatically put that in. Okay, now before we get to the last 2, which are real doozies and could really hurt your career, I'd like to invite you to hit the subscribe button. It's free, completely private, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Item number 9, if you will, don't forget that emails can be forwarded and copied without your knowledge, okay? So make sure you haven't done any of the things that we've discussed already, and that you haven't put anything in that email that you wouldn't want shared with the world, because before you know it, somebody will do a reply all, or somebody will forward it to somebody who you may have maligned in the email. And for that matter, even when you're writing one-on-one to a person, somebody that you trust, maybe you have a great relationship with your boss and you're writing back and forth, and let's say it's your boss's boss who's a real jerk. So you put something in there, he's really stupid or whatever, something derogatory. And anyway, the emails go back and forth, and then you start discussing a project and you go back and forth a little bit more about that. And then your boss thinks, you know what, we really should get Joe involved in this. We're going to need his approval or whatever they decide. And so they take that last email that you sent and they forward it to the person. And that email is fine. But what both of you have forgotten is that below that, when you do the forward, are all the prior emails where you've had this discussion. You've called him a jerk, called him stupid, some other thing that you really, really are not really that interested in having shared in that manner. So be very, very careful about what you put in there.
The whole notion of the elevator pitch,
Mhm.
or Mary, you call it what, a networking pitch.
A networking pitch, yes.
Yes. So you do want to have something ready to go. I'm so guilty of not having this. So I'm going to have to work on this. So Mary, what is it that you do?
Right. So I like to say that I prepare content relate for accounts payable and payments issues, and we share this in many formats. I can't remember if I told you or not, but Jamie and I did we talked a little bit about this, and he has one that starts off with, I have the best job in the world. You know, people think about elevator pitches. They think about that as more kind of you're selling something. Well, you are selling something. You're selling yourself. So I like the term networking pitch. I didn't come up with it. No big surprise there. Somebody else came up with it. But networking pitch, because you never know when you're going to meet your next boss. Before we get to those making a good impression on a job interview tips, here are a few general tips. Tip number 1, be enthusiastic. Show interest in the person you meet. Don't hold back or be afraid to show that you're excited about something. In fact, people often see passion as a charming sign of strength and inspiration. You can show your enthusiasm by smiling and incorporating friendly humor. This will make you seem approachable and easygoing. Tip number 2, show respect. People want to feel respected before they're going to interact with you in a meaningful way. Tip number 3, be polite. A simple old-fashioned show of good manners goes a long way. So don't forget please and thank yous. And this is true not only for the person you just met, but others as well. Treat everyone around you well, as it says a lot about who you are. You've probably heard this, but it bears repeating. When eating out, especially if it's part of a job interview, be exceedingly polite to the wait staff. Tip number 4, be open to new ideas. Interestingly, openness is an inviting trait, so don't be afraid to give new experiences a chance. You may be in for a pleasant surprise. Tip number 5, realize it's not all about you. It's great to show off your knowledge when meeting someone new, especially in a job interview. But people also like to see a degree of humility because it shows that you understand there's always room for learning and adapting to new ways. That's one of the big reasons we make such a big deal about you asking questions during a job interview. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Tip number 6, pay attention to your body language. It has a huge influence on first impressions. Sadly, it's more important, at least in the beginning, than the actual words that come out of your mouth. It's important to be aware of the way you present yourself. Make sure your posture is good, make strong eye contact, and lean forward to show interest, to express some interest. Look at it this way. Which person are you more apt to feel confident with? Someone who's going like this, or someone who's smiling and talking and is asking questions? And now to those tips to help you make a good impression on your job interview. It's no secret that the best person for the position doesn't always get the job. We've all scratched our heads from time to time, wondering why that clown got the job. The answer is quite simple. It goes to the person who sells themselves the best. But how do they do that? I'm going to share some secrets those great sellers use to position themselves as the best candidate, so you can do the same thing. The only difference being, you will actually be the best person for the job. And by the way, this works both for jobs with a new company as well as promotional opportunities in your current position. It works for accounting, finance, accounts payable, payments, and a slew of other positions. We'll discuss the 5-second rule, the 10-minute rule, the early bird rule, and the uphill battle rule to ensure you are armed and ready for battle when you go on that all-important interview. Make sure you stick around until the end when we share the one place where many fall down during the interview, and we'll show you how to avoid that debacle. Interview success tactic number 1.
on. Remember the 5-second rule when it comes to your resume. On average, recruiters will spend 5 seconds evaluating your resume before deciding whether to read further on or move on. Once they've moved on, the damage is done. You are out of the running for that job. So make sure your resume is perfect, formatted nicely, easy to read, which means a decent sized font and font size, and no typos. First impressions are critical. If you haven't looked at your resume in a while, take another look at it. Same goes with your LinkedIn profile, which is where the recruiter is likely to go next. I want to say something about typos. You never see them in your own work. I know, sadly, I can speak from personal experience. It's not enough to have someone proof your resume when you complete it. You need to do this every single time you update it, no matter how small the update. Because if you don't, one of those small nasty typos will sneak in. Interview success tactic number 2. Remember the 10-minute rule when it comes to your interview. This is true whether you're doing a live interview or doing an interview over Zoom. Most interviewers will have made their decision on whether you're a potential candidate for the position or not within the first 10 minutes. Often, the first interview, a screening call really, will be done over Zoom. Take this just as seriously as you would a live interview, with one additional caveat. You don't want to unintentionally signal that you are anything but completely serious about work. This is all, by the way, subconscious. So take a close look at what the interviewer will see if the call is on Zoom. Don't have any unmade bed or dirty dishes showing up in the background. Set up your computer with an appropriate background. This might even be in a hall, ideally in an office-like setting. Then call a friend or your mother and ask them how everything looked. My son did this once a few years ago, and he and I maneuvered the screen around until you couldn't see his kitchen in the background. If it is a live interview, then take similar care with your appearance. It is critical that you come across as lively, intelligent, interested, and knowledgeable during those first 10 minutes when they are forming their opinion of you. Do this part right, and you won't have to worry about the uphill battle rule that we're going to discuss a little later on. Clearly, first impressions are important. You never get a second chance to make a good first impression. But that's not the only way these successful self-promoters sell themselves. As you'll see, they've got a few other tricks up their sleeve. Before we get to the early bird rule, and it's not what you're thinking, I'd like to request that if you're getting any value out of this, you hit the like or the thumbs up button to let both this channel and me know so that the information may be shared with many more people, and I should make more like it. And also a big thank you from me to all of you who did that for me. Interview success tactic number 3. Remember the early bird rule. While most interview strategies include asking some strong questions at the end, there's something to be said for asking those questions at the appropriate time much earlier in the interview. So, in addition to answering their questions, make sure you don't drone on too long about anything, but also ask a few very thoughtful questions of your own at the appropriate time. There are several reasons for asking these questions. Number 1, you want the information. Number 2, you will seem interested and invested in the potential job. And number 3, their answers will help you craft your responses to their questions. So here are a few questions that will help you do that. 1, what is the vision for the role? 2, what are the department's greatest weaknesses? 3, what is your biggest concern that keeps you up at night? By identifying how they are thinking and what their needs are early in the game, you can craft your answers so they help paint you as the ideal candidate. For example, if they say, we have too many duplicate payments, you can craft your answer to include how you have successfully reduced the number in your existing position. If the interviewer reveals that they are concerned about AI, sprinkle your responses throughout the rest of the interview about how you have used AI or instances where you found AI making critical mistakes, as it sometimes does. Interview success tactic number 4. Remember the avoid the uphill battle rule. Traditional interviewing advice includes the advice to have some questions to ask at the end when they say, do you have any questions? And you definitely should be prepared with questions for that eventuality. But don't sit there like a bump on the log until they get to that point. Ask the ones ones that will give you insight into the company much earlier, as we've discussed. Don't wait until the end, thinking your questions will undo any damage your lackluster performance from earlier in the interview has done. The damage has been done, and it will be nothing short of a miracle if you are able to change someone's opinion at this point. But have some questions prepared in case you don't have any based on what was being said during the interview. If you don't, they're apt to think you're either not interested or not very bright, and neither of those things is good for your prospects of landing a job. Making good impressions on job interviews, though, is just the first step. The next is to succinctly answer the questions the interviewer asks you without rambling. Easier said than done. That's why the STAR method of responding works so well. How can you use it? Find out right now by watching the video whose link has appeared on your YouTube screen and is in the description. Good luck.